The FBI is known to be involved in some serious and really strange cases. Some of these cases can be rather troubling to hear. The libertarian radio host Ian Freeman has been convicted of aiding people in buying Bitcoin. It was in March of 2021 when the FBI led a raid in Keene, New Hampshire. The raid was led on Free Talk Live Studios, which is a libertarian radio show. The raid was carried out by both the agency as well as ATF and others against Ian Freeman, the Free Talk Live director. It was alleged that Freeman had been operating an illegal money transmitting business, which was being done in the form of Bitcoin ATMs. The raid had taken place during the evening when the agencies rolled up to Freeman's property using Bearcat armored vehicles. $180,000 in cash was confiscated, along with a few boxes full of gold bags. There were also 101 physical Bitcoins that were taken by the FBI. More homes were raided that same night, and the case would go on to be named the Crypto Six. The agency's main justification for these raids was that there were scammers making use of Bitcoin vending machines to scam others out of their money. Freeman claimed that he had often warned people about such scams and used his vending machines to improve his business. Freeman believes that he's a force that can be used to create a peaceful and just world. He's the minister of the Shire Free Church and thinks that the selling of Bitcoin plays a key role in his ministry. On one of the episodes of his radio show, he expressed that he felt as though his calling was to spread peace. He explained that Bitcoin is undermining, as he put it, the warmonger state, and that the more dollars there are out of circulation, then the less empowered the state will be. In 2006, Freeman had moved to the area and became a participant in the Free State Project, an organization he's no longer associated with. His participation in the organization was to aid the creation of a political unit that would respect the freedom of citizens. The Free State Project had made various strides in New Hampshire, and along with Freeman's efforts, New Hampshire became a center of retail Bitcoin commerce. Freeman still lived in a nation that respects the freedom to use a currency of choice that one would desire to use. A 5-year investigation would go on to take place against Freeman that would ultimately result in the raid that confiscated a lot of money, along with some other belongings including computers. 5 associates of Freeman were arrested along with him in separate raids that occurred that same day. Various plea deals were made, and by the end of it, Freeman was the only one who actually went to trial. He had initially spent 69 days locked up while the government argued that he was a flight risk. Freeman got out on $200,000 bond. In an email, Freeman expressed that he had a tracking anklet attached to him that would reveal if he had left his property. There was also spyware placed on his computer and his phone, and he was not allowed to use any cryptocurrency. He further detailed that he was not allowed to contact certain people. Ian Freeman was later sentenced to 8 years in prison on 8 counts of cryptocurrency-related operations, including unlicensed money transmitting business, attempting to evade taxes, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. A court fine of $40,000 was also ordered to be paid. Freeman had expressed in a court hearing that he believed that he did not break the law. Freeman detailed that he had failed to prevent 100% of the scam victims from making use of his crypto service and took full responsibility for his failure. He added that he was trying to catch and prevent scammers and that he was also being tricked by the scam victims. During the 11th of September court hearing, 3 victims were brought forward who had lost thousands to romance scams where someone would pretend to be in love with them and were in need of money. One of these victims expressed that she had sent $300,000 to a scammer, who instructed her to send the money to Freeman in order for it to be converted into Bitcoin. It was found that there were dozens of victims that were identified during the investigation. Some of them had even lost all of their life savings. Freeman's wife was also brought in during one of the court hearings, where she stated that Freeman should not be punished harshly because doing so would not help any of the individuals who were a victim of the scams. Back in 1984, 2 FBI offices had received similar documents of a memo titled Operation Majestic 12. This memo was said to be a highly classified document that appeared to be a briefing for the then President Eisenhower. It was informing him of a secret organization that was created to exploit the recovery of an alien aircraft, as well as cover up the work thereafter. It was in December of 1984 when a package that had no return address, along with an Albuquerque postmark, had found itself in the mail belonging to Jamie Shendera in North Hollywood, California. Within this package, there had been a 35mm roll of film, which turned out to be 8 pages of the alleged briefing, that was dated as the 19th of November, 1952. In this memo, it was Vice Administrator Roscoe Hillen-Coder who was informing the elected President Dwight Eisenhower of a recovery of 2 alien aircraft that had crashed. In the first crash, which is said to have occurred in July of 1947, the authorities had recovered 4 humanoid creatures from the crash site. The document detailed that after this, President Harry Truman had authorized the making of the secret group, which was called Majestic 12, that was used to study the remains. After a tip that came from sources claiming to be representatives of the Air Force intelligence, both Shendera as well as his associate William Moore, who co-authored the Roswell incident, flew to Washington where they would go on to search the National Archives for any reference to the official Majestic 12 documents. During their search, they were able to come across a memo dated as July of 1954 that came from General Robert Cutler, the Eisenhower assistant. The Majestic 12 Special Studies Project was detailed in this memo that was said to be held at the White House on the 16th of July. In 1987, a British author named Timothy Good also received a copy of the memo from an unknown person who claimed to be associated with the FBI. When Moore and Shendera heard that Good would be disclosing the existence of this document, they too released their copy, which went along with the Cutler memo. The result of the release of these documents caused an uproar, which included a New York Times coverage, a full-on FBI investigation, and controversy that still persists today. Upon further investigation, it was found that the documents that were sent to these individuals were actually bogus and subjects of forgery. The identity of the individual who released these documents and forged them remains one of the biggest mysteries to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. What is strange about the whole case is that the forger somehow had access to rather obscure and official information, most of which were not even on public record. This led to the suspicion that an intelligence agency had purposefully created this document for misinformation. The Majestic 12 documents remain one of the most puzzling of hoaxes known to unidentified flying object history. The pages of the documentation involving this case were released by the Black Vault, which is the largest online Freedom of Information Act and government record clearinghouse known to the world. On a few of the pages, the word bogus can be seen written right across the page. This case remains one of the strangest cases of the FBI's history. Although it was determined that this was in fact a forgery, with recent developments in UFOs and UAPs, there could be some level of truth with regards to the crash sites that supposedly held some alien beings inside the aircraft that were found there. One of the most popular files in the FBI vault is that of the Guy Hoddle Memo. The memo is dated as the 22nd of March, 1950, and since its public release, it's been viewed about 1 million times. The memo was written by Guy Hoddle, the head of the Federal Bureau of Investigation's field office in Washington. The document was addressed to the FBI director, J. Edgar Hoover. The memo detailed an account that was provided by an FBI agent by an informant who had heard it from an Air Force investigator. The subject was that of 3 flying saucers being recovered in New Mexico. The 3 flying saucers spoken of here are unrelated to the Roswell incident. The memo detailed that the UFOs were circular in shape and had a raised center. They were allegedly 50 feet in diameter, and each of the flying discs had 3 humanoid creatures inside that stood at 3 feet in height. The document explained that each of these creatures was dressed in a metallic fine cloth material. They were also bandaged in a manner that's similar to that of test pilots and speed flyers. The informant had told Hoddle that they suspected it was a high-powered radar setup that the government controlled in the area that had caused an interference in the UFOs, causing them to crash. This memo is said to have been publicly available since the 1970s, but it wasn't until 2011 that the memo received a lot more attention. It was in 2011 when the FBI vault added the Hoddle memo to the online public records. A British tabloid called The Sun had characterized the publication of the memo with the following headings, saying, quote, "Aliens exist, say real-life X-Files." The Federal Bureau of Investigation, however, denied that this memo constituted any evidence of the existence of aliens or alien aircraft. The memo was also not taken as seriously as you might think. After the memo reached the agency, the FBI never followed up with it. The agency had also explained that there's no reason as to why this memo should be referred to as a separate UFO incident when compared to the Roswell alien spaceship from 1947. The Hoddle Memo was only released 3 years after the alien encounter of Roswell. The agency also expressed that for a few years after the Roswell UFO, Hoover had been following up on an Air Force request where he ordered agents to verify and follow up on any reported UFO sightings. This had come to an end in 1950, 4 months after the release of the Hoddle Memo, which only suggested that the Washington field office did not think that the stories of UFOs were anything worth looking into. Another explanation for the Hoddle Memo related to conman Silas Newton. When the story was added to the vault, Ben Radford, a paranormal investigator, discovered that this was rather similar to a UFO hoax story that was conjured up by Silas. During 1950, Silas had been spreading rumors of spacecraft that reportedly crashed near a New Mexico radar station. He was later convicted of fraud, and the FBI vault also has an entire section devoted solely to Silas Newton. The Bureau did not confirm that this was the story either. They stated that although the memo does not prove the existence of aliens, they also can't confirm if it matches up with the rumors spread by Silas. According to an FBI historian, John Fox, the memo appears to look like third-hand information, and that the FBI could have viewed it as someone reporting hearsay. The memo is listed among hundreds of other pages of accounts headed Unexplained Phenomenon, which details the claims of UFO sightings, alien spacecraft debris, and extraterrestrial landings. Because the FBI did not go on to investigate the claims made in this memo, we'll never truly know if there were in fact extraterrestrials found in New Mexico during that time. And for the time being, the sighting remains unconfirmed. Guy Hoddle is said to have joined the FBI in 1934 as a special agent. In December of 1936, he became the head of the Washington FBI field office. The following May, he was appointed as the special agent in charge, where he served until May of 1941. He was then reappointed in 1943 until 1951 when he took up his position in the Identification Division. In 1955, Hoddle retired. Whitey Bulger was born in 1929 in Dorchester, Massachusetts, and passed away in 2018 in the U.S. Penitentiary Hazleton in West Virginia. Bulger was an American crime boss who had led the Boston Winter Hill Gang. Bulger was also a leading model of organized crime during the 1960s up until the 1990s. For over a decade, he was placed on the FBI's top 10 most wanted fugitives list until he was apprehended in June of 2011. Bulger had been born to Irish immigrants and grew up in South Boston. Due to his whitish blonde hair, the criminal was awarded the name Whitey in his early youth. As a teenager, Bulger had become involved in street gangs and was arrested on several occasions on charges of forgery and battery and assault. Somehow, Bulger would always manage to avoid serious consequences to his actions. This only made him more confident and pushed him to believe that he was invincible. In 1948, he had enlisted the U.S. Air Force, and 4 years later, he was discharged as honorable despite the various records of disciplinary issues during his service, which also included an assault on a woman in Great Falls, Montana. In 1956, after he resumed his criminal acts, Bulger was convicted of bank robberies in 3 states and was sentenced to 20 years in prison. But in 1965, he was granted parole, which came after stints in penitentiaries such as Leavenworth and Alcatraz. When he returned to Boston, he became the enforcer for a mob kingpin named Donald Killeen. In the 1970s, he took on a similar job for the Winter Hill Gang that was led by Howie Winter. In 1975, the criminal had then agreed to work with the Federal Bureau of Investigation as a top Echelon informant. Bulger's FBI handler had been John J. Connolly, who was 10 years younger than Bulger, and had even grown up idolizing him and his brother William, who became a powerful politician. The informant relationship would later become known as the Devil's Deal, after it turned corrupt. This was the rise of one of the worst informant scandals known to FBI history. Instead of the FBI agents controlling their informant, he ended up manipulating his handler as well as some of the other agents who were involved. Bulger also managed to evade being mentioned in an indictment for interfering with horse races at tracks along the East Coast in 1979. The case led to the condition of Winter and associates of the gang, which also led to Bulger becoming the leader of the Winter Hill Gang. Stephen Fleming, another FBI informant, then became his top lieutenant. Bulger was able to extort money from bookmakers, dealers, loan sharks, as well as other criminals in the area, and he soon acquired a reputation in the criminal trade. The corrupt relationship between the informant and Connolly began to grow stronger. The agent would alert Bulger of investigations that would be carried out into the Winter Hill Gang. He even turned a blind eye to homicide cases that the gang was involved in. The corrupt relationship between Bulger became quite clear to the locals as well as the state police. The authorities, including the Federal Drug Enforcement Administration, began a new investigation. In January of 1995, Bulger, Fleming, and others were charged with multiple counts of racketeering as well as extortion. Bulger, of course, was tipped off in advance by Connolly and managed to flee before the indictment. Media coverage concerning Bulger's crime grew extensively. Bulger and his girlfriend, Catherine Gregg, settled in Santa Monica after moving to many different areas. The two were living under alternate identities, which were Charlie and Carol Gasco. In the middle of June in 2011, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, who had Bulger on the most wanted list since 1999, initiated a campaign to find the girlfriend. A few days later, 2 individuals were found. The 1995 indictment that Bulger faced was dismissed, but he did face an additional one, charging him with a connection to 19 homicide cases. 2 weeks after the arrest, he'd pleaded not guilty. The following year, as Bulger awaited trial, Catherine Gregg was sentenced to 8 years for the role she had played in helping him evade authorities. In 2013, after a 2-month-long trial, Whitey Bulger was found guilty of 31 counts of criminal activity, which included participating in 11 homicide cases. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences with an additional 5 years. Bulger had spent his time in several prisons until he was transferred to the U.S. Penitentiary Hazleton on the 29th of October 2018, where he was fatally attacked by other inmates. As for the now former FBI agent John Connolly, he was convicted of homicide in the 2nd degree after he had leaked information to Bulger, which led to the fatal wounding of John Callahan. Connolly was initially sentenced to 40 years in prison. Connolly had been found guilty of various tip-offs to his informant, which only led to more and more crimes. He was later released on medical grounds after it was discovered he had cancer. Callahan's family was not in objection to his release, since it was suspected that the former agent had less than a year to live. On the 12th of January, 1976, Robert Philip Hansen had taken a sworn oath to enforce the law as well as to protect the nation when he became an FBI special agent. Unfortunately, Hansen would go on to become the most damaging spy known to FBI history. On the 18th of January, 2001, he would go on to be arrested and convicted of espionage on behalf of Russia as well as the Soviet Union. At the time, he'd been working under an alias, Ramon Garcia, with the Russian handlers. He was supplying the Russians with highly confidential national security data for over $1.4 million in cash, diamonds, and even bank funds. Hansen began his crimes in 1985. He was authorized to access a lot of secret information due to his position in the Bureau. He would go on to use encrypted language to communicate with the KGB and SVR. The information he went on to give them was made up of a variety of human sources, counterintelligence methods, classified government documentation, investigations, and important valuable technical operations. Due to his training as a counterintelligence official, his crime would go undetected for years, even though some of his activity did raise suspicion on some occasions. At this point, he was not identified as a spy. After the arrest of Aldrich Ames in the 1990s, the CIA and the Bureau began to realize that they had a mole among them, who they discovered was providing the Russians with information. The focus fell on a veteran CIA officer who was incorrectly investigated for about 2 years. In 2000, though, the agencies secured Russian documents relating to an American spy who seemed to point to Hansen. Upon further investigation, it was confirmed that the spy was indeed Hansen. By the time this discovery was made, Hansen was already in the process of retiring, and so the agencies would have to move quickly to achieve their goal and catch the spy red-handed in espionage activities. At the time that suspicions began to rise, Hansen had been working as a detailer at the Office of Foreign Missions at the Department of State. It was decided that he would be removed from this position and brought back to the headquarters. The special agent, Don Sullivan, who was a squad supervisor at the field office, volunteered to take his place in Hansen's position. Before Hansen was set to leave that position, Sullivan had gone there to learn the new role and had also been given the task of observing the man and learning as much information as he possibly could regarding the technology set up in Hansen's office. Sullivan would also be meeting and talking with Hansen during this time. Hansen had complete access to the FBI automated case support system, as well as the State Department computer systems. It was noted by Sullivan that Hansen had spent much of his time on the automated case support system, trolling for information. In order to get Hansen to the headquarters, the assistant director of the National Security Division, Neil Gallagher, informed the spy of a bogus assignment that he would serve on the staff. Gallagher had also told him that Director Louis Freach would allow for a 2-year extension on Hansen's service and would be promoting him to senior executive service. In January of 2001, Hansen would go on to move into an office at the headquarters that was secretly fitted with cameras and microphones. Eric O'Neill, Hansen's assistant, was given the task of keeping the investigators informed of his movements. By the following month, there were at least 300 individuals working the case and monitoring the spy. He would be tracked from the moment he left his house in Virginia to the moment he went back home. It was confirmed here that he was indeed an active spy. It was on the 18th of February, 2001, that investigators discovered that Hansen was due to use the drop or letterbox method. An arrest team had moved into position at the Foxstone Park where he was seen on FBI surveillance cameras. Hansen had parked in a residential street and walked along a wooden path to a bridge. In hand, he had the information all wrapped up in a plastic bag. As soon as he started making his way back to his vehicle, the team rushed out and arrested him. Hansen would go on to plead guilty to 15 counts of espionage on the 6th of July of that year. The following year, on the 10th of May, the man was sentenced to life without parole. Robert Hansen had been supplying Moscow with sensitive and top-secret information for the last 20 years. It took 300 agents to bring him down. It was reported that in December of 2000, an FBI agent named Richard Garcia had a strange visit from a colleague who had been overseeing the Russia desk. He was asked if he knew someone named Robert Hansen, to which he responded no. The official response was, "Good, because you're about to." Garcia had also played a large part in the investigation that led to the arrest of Hansen, sending shockwaves throughout the intelligence community. The theory of continental drift has been accepted by scientists since the 1960s. For decades, geologists have carefully reconstructed what Pangaea would have looked like hundreds of millions of years ago. But there have been some parts of the puzzle that have remained a mystery. Argoland was one such piece until the mystery was solved by researchers this year. Geologists have known about the existence of Argoland for a while, but only due to what it left behind. Off the coast of northern Australia is the Argo Abyssal Plain, a deep basin that was created when something large split away from Australia. The landmass was given the name Argoland. It was estimated to be as long as the continental United States is wide, and it split from Australia around 155 million years ago. This was a time when Australia was still attached to India, Antarctica, Africa, and South America, in a continent called Gondwana. Argoland would have drifted north into the Tethys Ocean that separated the southern part of Gondwana from what would eventually become mainland Eurasia. The same thing would happen to India a few million years later. But while India collided with Eurasia and formed the Himalayan mountains, Argoland apparently disappeared. The possibility that this landmass has been hidden for millions of years was quickly ruled out. Scientists were also able to confirm it hadn't sunk beneath the sea like Zealandia, but it also couldn't have disappeared into thin air. One possibility was that it had collided with Eurasia like India, but had been pulled under the larger continent. This has happened in other places of the world, and scientists were able to discover a lost continent that had been subducted beneath Europe. But in places where this had happened before, there was evidence left behind on the surface. The topmost layer of the lost continent would be scraped away, forming mountains that acted like geological gravestones to the disappeared landmass. Scientists expected to find something like this in Southeast Asia, the region where they expected Argoland had disappeared. But what they found didn't make sense. Geologists trying to solve the mystery found traces of a lost ocean that dated back to around 200 million years ago, before Argoland was believed to have separated from Australia. Parts of the landmass were found around Indonesia and Myanmar, but the puzzle didn't fit together properly. Researchers realized that they weren't looking for a lost continent, but a lost archipelago. Before fully separating from Australia, Argoland separated from itself. Tectonic activity split the continent into pieces, with new oceans forming between them. This would have happened over 200 million years ago, explaining the ocean crust that researchers discovered. The splintered landmass, which researchers called Argopelago, stayed near Australia before drifting northwards 155 million years ago. Most of the islands would be drawn back together as the landmass drew closer to Sundaland in Southeast Asia. The Argopelago would have brought with it diverse life. New species would have developed on the islands before they all collided and merged with Sundaland. Scientists believe this could explain why this area has so much biodiversity. There are still elements of this puzzle that scientists are trying to solve, like why Argoland separated in the first place. The lead researcher in the study had an important note to add too. He stated that the quote, "truth is always temporary. The truth is what we know so far until someone provides new knowledge, and then we have to adjust." The Forbidden City in Beijing, China, is one of the most important places in the country. For hundreds of years and through multiple dynasties, it was the administrative center of the country. Archaeology at the Forbidden City is a slow and careful process, with every dig revealing a little more about China's past, dating all the way back to the 1400s. But in 2016, maintenance work at the Forbidden City offered a glimpse into an even older era and solved one of the longest mysteries of Chinese history. The Yuan dynasty was the first foreign-ruled dynasty to rule over all of China, and was founded by Emperor Shizhu, better known as Kublai Khan. Kublai Khan was the grandson of Genghis Khan and came into power in China in 1260, though it wasn't until 1971 that he proclaimed the beginning of the Yuan dynasty, in the same style as previous Chinese dynasties. It was another 8 years before he conquered the southern kingdom and came to rule over all of China. The Yuan dynasty only ruled China for about 100 years, but it was important to Chinese history. Trade with the foreign countries was re-established. New art styles became popular. It was in this era that the blue and white porcelain that China is famous for started to be created. It was also during the rule of Kublai Khan that Marco Polo traveled to China, bringing back stories to Europe. For a long time, his descriptions would be what Europeans used to form opinions on the Eastern Empire. One of the many things Marco Polo described was Kublai Khan's palace. Even before proclaiming the Yuan dynasty, Kublai Khan would found the city that would be his capital. Dadu in modern-day Beijing would become the site of the Emperor's Winter Palace, a building which Polo described as the greatest palace that ever was. Polo claimed that the palace was made from cane and supported by hundreds of silk cords. The walls were covered in gold and silver, and the hall was big enough for 6,000 people to be seated for dinner. Even though Polo claimed it could be taken apart into pieces and transported when the emperor moved, most scholars believed it stayed in Dadu. The capital was abandoned by the last Yuan emperor as the Ming dynasty took control of China, and the Grand Palace disappeared. There were mixed thoughts about what could have happened to the palace. Some believed it was destroyed as the Ming fought for control. Others thought it may have survived the takeover, only to be destroyed during Ming construction projects. It was the early Ming dynasty that first constructed the Forbidden City. To do so, they tore down many Yuan buildings, even removing their foundations. For years, archaeologists have puzzled over the location of the Yuan dynasty imperial palace. It was believed to be somewhere around the Forbidden City, but where it was a mystery. Given the completeness of the Ming Dynasty's destruction, there was a fear that it might never be found. It was only by chance that the truth was uncovered. During maintenance work, archaeologists were allowed to take a look at the foundations of the Forbidden City. They were surprised to find 4 distinct layers to the foundations. The topmost and most recent layer dates back to the Qing dynasty. This was the dynasty that ruled China from 1636 until the monarchy was abolished. The next layer was the late Ming dynasty, then the early Ming dynasty. The final layer dated back even earlier. The 3-meter thick foundation of rammed earth and rubble dates back to the Yuan era, with some elements dating back even earlier. The style resembled the foundations of palaces in the other Yuan capitals. Whether or not this was the Grand Palace itself or some other Yuan building is impossible to tell with the evidence at hand, but archaeologists noted that it was much bigger than the typical Yuan buildings. They cannot be certain that it was the palace itself, but it was a grand building. It would be easy to imagine the palace that Marco Polo described sitting on this site. Archaeological research at the Forbidden City continues to be a very slow and careful process. The palace complex wasn't built once or even once per dynasty. Fires and natural disasters meant that it had to be rebuilt many times. With hundreds of layers of history piled on top of one another, it's possible that researching one layer could potentially damage another. Scholars have made other surprising discoveries at the site, including foundations that indicate that some buildings might have been twice the size that they are today. Depictions that were once believed to be hyperbole may have been accurate, and there could have been other hidden gems buried beneath the layers of history. Robert Berney was one of Hungary's most celebrated artists. His work was appreciated in his lifetime, and he was one of the most influential artists in the country. But in the destruction of the Second World War, many of Berney's paintings disappeared, including one known as the Sleeping Lady with Black Vase. In 2009, it was rediscovered in the most surprising of places. Berney studied in Paris as a young man, and brought a new art movement back with him to Hungary. He was part of the avant-garde movement, and his most famous works were Expressionism and Cubism styles. As well as being important to the art movement, he also played an important part in the revolutions that occurred in Hungary at the start of the 20th century, producing artwork to be used in propaganda. But when the counter-revolution took place and Berney fled to Berlin, his work changed. His focus was now on post-impressionism and Art Deco. His second wife, Edda, was his muse, and he painted many pieces involving her. Most featured Edda relaxing or sleeping. One, The Cellist, featured Ella playing the cello. For a long time, it was Berney's most famous work, though another portrait of Edda would surpass it when it was rediscovered. Sleeping Lady with Black Vase was a portrait of Edda in an Art Deco style. She lay back on a sofa with her arms crossed in her sleep. A black vase balances on a table in front of her. The painting was made in the same year as The Cellist, but it's very different. The bright reds and oranges are replaced by blues and blacks. The work was sold to a private collector at auction in 1928, and then disappeared from the public eye. By this point, Berney and his family had returned to Hungary, but it wouldn't be a safe place for them for long. Not only was the country part of the fighting during the Second World War, Berney and his family were Jewish. Most of the buyers at the auction where the Sleeping Lady was sold were also Jewish. Many fled Hungary during the German invasion, while Berney and his family went into hiding. After the war, Berney started to rebuild his life under the Soviet regime in Hungary. What happened to the buyer of this painting remained a mystery. Eventually, Berney's importance to Hungarian art was realized by art historians. There was a search for the paintings that had been lost during the war. Many were rediscovered, while others were feared lost forever. Across the continent, important works of art were stolen by the Germans, some never to be recovered. Others were simply destroyed, but there was a hope that whoever had bought the sleeping woman had escaped the war, bringing the painting with them. For decades, the mystery of the painting remained unsolved. It was only by chance that it was finally answered. In 2009, an art historian at the Hungarian National Gallery sat with his young daughter to watch the children's movie Stuart Little. He wasn't that interested in the story of a wealthy family adopting a talking mouse, but something in the background caught his eye. Hanging on the wall of the Little family was the sleeping lady in black vase. At this point, only a black and white photograph of the painting was known to exist, but the historian was certain this was the lost artwork. He tracked down the art director of the movie, but they had no idea what had happened to the painting. By this point, the film was over 10 years old. It turned out that the assistant art director had bought the painting from the studio and hung it in her home for a while before selling it to another private collector. Eventually, the historian and other investigators were able to track down this private collector and return the painting to Hungary. They were able to determine its history from the mid-90s. At that point, someone had donated it to a charity auction house in San Diego. It was bought by a man named Michael Hamstead, who recognized it as Bernie but didn't realize its significance as a lost piece of work. He sold it for about $500 to an antique store, who then sold it to the filmmakers. It was sold again in 2014, but this time at a highly anticipated auction in Hungary. It was bought for $250,000, the highest price ever paid for a Bernie painting. Kenon isn't a name that's familiar to the general public, but in his time, he was a very important official and a close friend to Egyptian pharaoh Amenhotep II. His tomb was one of many explored by Jean-Francois Champollion, the man who deciphered the Rosetta Stone. But for centuries, the location of Kenon's mummy remained a mystery. Kenon is sometimes called the foster brother of the pharaoh. His mother was the wet nurse of Amenhotep, meaning the two would have likely grown up together. He was Amenhotep's closest friend, and that friendship lasted after Amenhotep took the throne. Kenon became the pharaoh's right-hand man, earning titles such as Chief Steward of the King and Chief Steward of Peru-Nefer, an important port center in Memphis. The role involved a lot of administrative work, as well as luxuries and an important place during festivities. But it was also directly important to Amenhotep himself. Kenon was trusted to be on the lookout for any threats to the king, and to identify any people who couldn't be trusted. It was a job he took very seriously, but also one that likely earned him a lot of enemies. Amenhotep had planned an extravagant funeral for Kenon, including a procession of statues and a parade of singers from Amon temples. Whether that funeral happened isn't known, but Kenon was put to rest in a tomb fitting his position as a trusted advisor to the king. The tomb was like a palace in its own right. It was carved into a sacred mountain, which is now known as the Valley of the Nobles in Thebes. Today, the tomb is called TT93. It has two levels, one at the surface and another below ground. The level below ground cannot be accessed today. The surface level has a floor space of 731 square meters, with another 500 square meters in inaccessible areas. The ceilings are high, and many columns line the main hall. Like many Egyptian tombs, the walls are covered in paintings depicting scenes from the period and people who would have helped Kenon in the afterlife. There were once many images of Kenon himself, but when Egyptologists found the tomb in the 1800s, those images had been defaced. Every depiction of Kenon had been carefully chiseled. The artwork of his mother and the king lay untouched. Whoever had done this had specifically wanted to hurt Kenon in the afterlife. The significance of Kenon's tomb and Kenon himself was gradually uncovered, but by this time, the whereabouts of his remains were a mystery. It wasn't known for certain if they'd been brought back to Champollion and Rosellini, or if they had been moved in antiquity. The first clue to solve that mystery was found in 2012. The National History Museum of Calci is one of the oldest natural history museums in the world. It's housed in what used to be a monastery near the Italian city of Pisa. While going through old storerooms, workers at the museum located a cardboard box with skeletal remains inside. Written in black ink on the skull was a short inscription, stating that it was one of the mummies brought back from Egypt by Rosellini. Around the same time, the letter written to Grand Duke Leopold was uncovered in the National Archives in Prague. It had a full list of the artifacts he was bringing back, including 11 mummies. Rosellini explained that he and the team had uncovered many more artifacts and bought others, but he had to leave some behind due to the cost of transportation. He was only bringing back the best specimens. The location of 10 of the mummies was known. 7 were on display in Florence, while another 3 were destroyed. The location of the final mummy was never determined. It seemed likely that these remains, found at the National History Museum, were the missing mummy. Experts guessed that the remains had deteriorated significantly during the voyage, and Rossellini decided it was no longer fit to be presented to the Grand Duke. It was instead given to a friend at the museum. But that didn't necessarily mean it was Kenon. Another part of the letter described the coffin that the mummy had been found in. It was a black varnished coffin with yellow hieroglyphs. A search at the Florence Egyptian Museum uncovered the same coffin, though it was badly damaged. Written in hieroglyphs was the phrase, "God's father Kenon." The final piece of the puzzle was all that was needed to finally solve the mystery. Kenon's remains were reunited with the coffin and are on display at the same museum where Kenon remained hidden for centuries. Barbara Rocky was a bright young woman studying in Utah when her life was cut short by an unknown assailant. For decades, her family was left wondering who took the life of their loved one on a chilly March day in 1974. Barbara was described as creative and a free spirit. She was born in California and grew up in a space where she was able to explore her spirituality. She was interested in different religions and exploring what they meant to the people that followed them. She was especially interested in the Mormon faith. When it came to choosing where to study at university, Brigham Young University in Utah attracted her. She didn't really fit in with the other students there. The student population was predominantly Mormon and much more conservative than Barbara, but that only made her more interested in studying there. The situation at BYU became tense. In January of 1974, she moved into a house with some other students. They were Mormon, and they were uncomfortable with Barbara. Some would later tell police that she was interested in witchcraft and devil worship. Whether she was actually interested in witchcraft or just alternative religions isn't clear, but things were coming to a boiling point in Provo. Despite her alternative lifestyle, Barbara did manage to make friends at BYU. One of these was a man named Gerard Hicker, who was also a student. On the morning of March 11th, Hicker dropped off Barbara's car keys after he had borrowed the vehicle. Barbara had some errands to run, but they agreed to meet up later in the day to go grocery shopping. When Barbara didn't show up, Hicker went out looking for her. He found her in a parking lot outside an apartment building. This seemed strange to him, and he went to investigate. It was then that he found a note in the car addressed to her roommates. Barbara said that she had found her people, and she was leaving to be with them. Hicker took the note to Barbara's home to speak with her roommates. He then called the police to report Barbara missing at around 4 p.m. There was some fear that Barbara had decided to take her own life, so the disappearance was taken seriously. The last known sighting of her was at 1 p.m. on March 11th, when she visited a shop to pawn some jewelry. The next day, a utility company worker found Barbara's body in the Big Cottonwood Canyon. She'd been struck by 5 bullets. One hit her in the arm and the others were in the back. The type of bullet indicated the weapon as an Astra 357 caliber, the same type that Barbara was known to own. The weapon wasn't found anywhere near the scene of the crime. Significantly, this type of weapon doesn't eject the bullet casing when used. Even though the bullets themselves were found, the casings were missing. This meant that no fingerprints could be found. There was little evidence at the scene, but police took the bullets and samples of soil under Barbara's body. At the time, there was little that could be done with these. Police speculated that things had become too much for Barbara's roommates, and one of them had decided to take her life. But after examining each of them, they were all ruled out. Attention then turned to a man named Richard, who Barbara had described as her boyfriend. Richard was a self-proclaimed psychic, and Barbara at one point told her therapist that he was a warlock and a devil worshipper. Barbara had told one of her roommates that he had once threatened her with a bladed weapon. Richard denied being Barbara's boyfriend and claimed their relationship was more spiritual. That didn't make him any less of a suspect. He also lived near the location where Barbara was found, and his alibi for the period wasn't one police trusted. The police believed that Barbara had gone to Big Cottonwood Canyon with someone she trusted. Richard seemed like a good suspect, but there was nothing actually linking him to the crime. Interestingly, Richard wasn't the only person Barbara may have been romantically involved with. A few weeks after Barbara passed away, a man named Peter Thompson was attacked. Peter was found in San Mateo County at the side of the road next to his car. He was another boyfriend of Barbara and had actually been on his way home from visiting her parents when he was attacked. He claimed he had picked up a hitchhiker who had then turned on him. When investigators asked for his address and phone number, he gave Barbara's. But he was significantly wounded at the time, so it's understandable that he might have been confused. He wasn't the only person connected to Barbara that was attacked. 5 days earlier, a friend at Stanford campus named Janet Taylor was attacked and had her life taken. Police wondered if the three crimes were connected. Barbara knew Janet well and was dating Peter, but besides that, there was no connection between the crimes. It was a chilling coincidence, but just a coincidence. Another possibility was that Barbara had been a victim of Ted Bundy, who had targeted college-aged women and had struck in Utah before. But he had been in Washington the day before Barbara was attacked, so this seemed unlikely. The case went cold, and it wouldn't be until 2005 that investigators took another look at it. By now, technology had advanced enough for the case to be solved. The soil samples initially collected in 1974 were analyzed, and a small amount of tissue was found in it. This was tested, and the results were surprising. It was Gerard Hicker, who had taken Barbara's life. He would later claim that he had found her worshiping the devil, but prosecutors believed that he had grown angry when she rejected his advances. He was also upset that she was leaving BYU. Hicker was terminally ill when he was arrested and allowed to plead guilty to manslaughter. He spent 5 years behind bars before being released in 2012. He passed away due to illness in 2014. This image appears like an ordinary picture of a random man, but this is actually a photograph of Christopher Wilder. Wilder had carried out fatal attacks on individuals in 1984 for 7 weeks. This man was a race car driver and found it fairly easy to attract women using his nice car, as well as a fancy expensive camera, all tied together with some lies to lure them in. At the time, these women, who were pulled into Wilder's charming lifestyle, were unaware that their lives would be coming to an end. Christopher Wilder was born in 1945 in Sydney, Australia, to his American naval officer father and Australian mother. At the age of 17 years old, Wilder had already been convicted of a crime that occurred on a Sydney beach. For this, he had received 1 year of probation, as well as compulsory counseling. During the counseling, Wilder had made claims that he'd gone through electroshock therapy, and at the age of 23 years old in 1968, he had gotten married. His new wife had discovered evidence in Wilder's car, which revealed he'd already been having an affair. The marriage had only lasted around a week or so, and Wilder was accused of abuse, and the new wife claimed that he had tried to take her life. A year later, when Wilder was 24, he had relocated to Boynton Beach, Florida. This is where he would go on to make a living in construction as well as real estate. He had made a lot of money, which allowed him to purchase a Porsche 911 that he used in racing, a speedboat, as well as a bachelor pad. Later, he became interested in photography as a hobby and purchased various expensive cameras. This hobby would go on to become a key part in the attacks that he carried out. It was stated that the man had spent some of his time around South Florida beaches, where he searched for women to solicit. He was arrested in Pompano Beach in 1971 after demanding indecent images from 2 women. In 1974, the man, who now had 2 convictions against him, lured a woman back to his house, stating that a modeling contract was involved. He would then go on to assault her. Wilder, at this point, had not served any time for the crimes that he had so far committed. With the lack of consequences, he only grew more confident to carry out more crimes. In 1982, Wilder had kidnapped 2 young females and was later charged with this, as well as assault that he inflicted on them. But due to some legal delays, the case was never heard. The next year, he had done a similar activity where he abducted another 2 girls, and his violent crimes would carry on. It was a year after this that Wilder would embark on his 7-week-long attack on various individuals. It had all begun on the 26th of February, 1984. and during this 7-week cross-country trip, he would go on to take the lives of 8 women who wanted to be models. The first victim had been a 23-year-old woman named Rosario Gonzalez, who had been working at the Miami Grand Prix. Rosario was last seen leaving the track with Wilder. On the 5th of March, Elizabeth Kenon, a 23-year-old former Miss Florida, had also disappeared. Wilder and Elizabeth had previously dated, and a proposal was made, which Elizabeth had declined. She was last seen at a gas station. According to an attendant, Wilder was accompanying Elizabeth, and it was stated that they would be doing a photo shoot together. A private investigator later arrived at Wilder's front door, which had spooked him, leading him to flee to Merritt Island. Elizabeth and Rosario were never discovered. On the 19th of March, the next victim had been Teresa Ferguson, who went missing from Merritt Island Mall. Witnesses stated that they had seen a man matching Wilder's description. The woman's body was later discovered in the Polk County Canal. The next attack occurred the following day on a Florida University student named Linda Grover, and despite the gruesome assault that was carried out, Linda made her escape and was later rescued. She was able to identify her attacker as Christopher Wilder based on photographs that the police officers had shown her. On the 21st of March, he had arrived in Texas, where he would go on to take the life of a nursing student named Terry Walden. The next victim was 21-year-old Suzanne Logan, and then Cheryl Bonaventura, who was 18 years old. She was initially abducted from a shopping mall and later checked into a hotel in Page, Arizona. Cheryl was never seen again until the discovery of her body. The infamous image of the man was taken at the 17 magazine competition in Las Vegas, where he had left with Michelle Korfman, who he had also taken the life of. He would then go on to attack another 2 women who had both survived, one of which was Dawnette Wilt, who was able to identify Wilder as her attacker. The final victim had been a 33-year-old woman named Beth Dodge, who he had kidnapped and later fatally wounded. On the 13th of April, 2 state troopers had recognized him in Coldbrook at a gas station. Wilder had quickly leaped into his car when they began to approach him. There was a struggle, and they tried to arrest him, and 2 shots had been fired, wounding Wilder fatally and ultimately ending his life. On the 16th of July, 2011, one of the most disturbing crimes would be carried out by a 17-year-old teenager named Tyler Hadley. Hadley had been living in Port St. Lucie in Florida with his parents. On this day, at 15 minutes past 1, the teenager posted "Party at my crib tonight, maybe," on his Facebook status. The only issue was that his mother and father would be home. They had recently grounded Hadley for drinking and for the use of narcotics, and so they were not about to let the 17-year-old throw a house party. Some of his friends had known that Hadley was grounded at the time, and one of them asked if it was really happening. He responded to this by explaining that he was working on it, and by 15 minutes past 8 in the evening, the party had begun, with loads of Hadley's schoolmates filing in, and even some strangers. This was after he had confirmed the party by posting on his Facebook wall again, stating "Party at my house." One of the friends again questioned his parents, asking what would happen should his parents return home. Hadley's eerie response was, "They won't, trust me." This was because just a short while before, he had taken his parents' lives. Blake and Mary Jo Hadley were Tyler's parents, and it was stated that the two had been worried about him for years and had even taken him to a psychiatrist. After extensive attempts at trying to help the teenager, nothing seemed to help. In one evening, Hadley had crossed a line, and so his phone and car keys were taken away as punishment. This only aggravated the teenager more, and he expressed that he wished to take the life of his mother to his best friend, Michael Mandel. What appears to have been a seemingly regular image of 2 friends at a party was actually Hadley and Mandel in the Hadley home, where the bodies of Blake and Mary lay cold behind the bedroom door. Initially, Mandel had brushed the aggressive statement off as just another angry teenager upset with his parents, and he never thought that he would have gone through with it, but he did. On that fateful day, Hadley had taken both of his parents' phones, making it impossible for them to call for help. He then took a substance to help with going through with his plan, since he didn't believe he could carry it out sober. His weapon of choice had been a hammer that he grabbed from the garage. Hadley first took the life of his mother, who began to scream, alerting Blake. He would then go on to place his parents' bodies in their bedroom, along with various methods of cleaning equipment that he used to cover up the crime scene. Moments later, he would be inviting a whole lot of people over to his house for a party. By midnight, there were around 60 people in the house, and none of them knew what was hidden behind his parents' bedroom door. It was reported that the teenager initially stated that his parents were out of town in Orlando, before changing the story, claiming that the house was actually his and his parents didn't even live there. Later in the evening, Tyler Hadley would go on to pull his best friend, Michael Mandel, aside and tell him that he had just taken the lives of his parents. Mandel was in shock and initially didn't believe him and asked what he was talking about. Hadley told him to look at the driveway and noted that all of the vehicles were still there. He then repeated that he had taken their lives. Mandel still didn't believe him until Hadley had taken him to the room. He soon realized that his friend did go ahead with the plan. Mandel was in shock, and instead of leaving the party in a hurry, he took a picture with his friend, thinking it would be the last time he would see him. After this, the teenager left Hadley's house and called Crime Stoppers at 24 minutes past 4 on the morning of the 17th of January. The authorities made their way to the Hadley family home where the party was still going on. Despite protests from Hadley, the police made an emergency entrance into the home. An arrest affidavit detailed that Tyler Hadley was nervous and rather frantic, and had been rather talkative with the officers. The investigating officers had discovered evidence relating to the crime that had taken place. The parents of the teenager were discovered and an arrest was made. 3 years later, Tyler Hadley was sentenced to life in prison. In the following photograph, Dava Leonard, a missing person, is pictured. Dava was 41 years old at the time of her disappearance, which was said to have been on the 3rd of March, 2021. She was last seen in the Rainbow Valley subdivision in Teller County, Colorado. As per the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, Dava was actually last seen in this area on the 28th of February at her boyfriend's residence. She was only reported missing the following month on the 11th of March. Dava's sister, Mika, expressed that she had initially notified the Teller County Sheriff's Office that Dava might be missing on the 6th of March in 2021. Ever since the report, Mika had been praying for her sister's safe return. She had also stated that her concerns were not being taken seriously at the time. She also fears that Dava may no longer be alive. There's a lack of evidence in this case, leading authorities nowhere. With posters and descriptions going out, their only hope is that someone will recognize her somewhere around the world. It was explained that when Dava didn't show up to one of her 6 children's birthday parties on the 5th of March, her family knew something was certainly wrong. Dava is said to have not had a cell phone or a vehicle, and since her disappearance, there's not been any activity on her bank account. She left behind all of her belongings, as well as Ello, her dog. Her family stated that Dava would never leave her dog behind. Only a few details concerning this case have been revealed, and an investigation is ongoing. Dava's family is rather concerned for her welfare and hopes that a lead will soon reveal itself as to the whereabouts of this missing person. Later, Mika had expressed concerns about Dava's boyfriend and made mention of domestic abuse, although this was not confirmed. Mika explained that the two had met on a dating website and recalled the first time that he had come to pick Dava up from their house. According to Mika, the man had been rather possessive and came in demanding that Dava gather all of her things. This had left everyone in the house shocked. It's uncertain when exactly Dava and her boyfriend had gotten together. It's also not been revealed if the boyfriend is being considered a suspect or not, but the case has still not been solved, and the woman has remained a missing person for the past 2 years. Dava is said to be 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighs between 120 to 130 pounds. She has brown hair and green eyes and was wearing a gray Columbia jacket at the time of her disappearance. She has a distinct piercing situated below her left eye and wears cat eye glasses with a black rim. Another distinctive feature is that the missing woman has a dragon tattoo on her back and a scar on her left arm, as well as another tattoo. She's said to wear dentures. It's urged that if anyone has any information regarding this individual's whereabouts, that they contact the Teller County Sheriff's Office at 719-687-9652. In 1998, in the early morning hours of New Year's Day, 17-year-old Olivia Hope and her friend 21-year-old Ben Smart had been delivered by a water taxi to a yacht off of the Furneaux Lodge. Neither of the individuals have been seen since. The following day, a major investigation began. Along with the two friends, a mystery man had also accompanied them on the water taxi. The story unfolded when Olivia had left her Grovetown Marlborough home and embarked on a drive to Warramunga Bay on the afternoon of the 30th of December. Olivia and her sister Amelia had taken a yacht called the Tamarack, along with 7 other individuals. The next day, the Tamarack had gone back to Picton and picked up another 3 people. Olivia, Amelia, and their friends then used a water taxi to get from the Tamarack to the Endeavour Inlet to Furneaux Lodge in order to be part of the New Year's celebrations with another 2,000 people. This is where Olivia met up with her lifelong friend Ben Smart, who was from Blenheim. He was staying near Punga Cove during their trip. In the early morning hours, the two friends had made use of the Furneaux Lodge taxi to get back to the Tamarack. It had been crowded with around 12 people, and so they waited for the water taxi to return so that they could find somewhere else to bunk. When the taxi returned, there was another person on it. The driver of the Furneaux Lodge water taxi was Guy Wallace, who stated that Olivia and Ben had asked to be taken ashore, but the third occupant had offered them a sleeping area aboard his yacht, which they accepted. Wallace would go on to describe this mystery man as scruffy-looking and expressed that the 3 individuals had gotten aboard a 12-meter-long wooden yacht. He detailed it as having a 2-masted ketch, which was painted white along with a blue stripe as well as rounded portholes. The yacht was among another 160 or so vessels tied up at the dock for the New Year's celebrations. This particular yacht was gone by 8:30 that morning. When Olivia failed to rejoin the Tamarack, concerns began to arise. By the following day, Olivia's parents felt as though something was seriously wrong and reported their daughter missing. The authorities believed that there may have been an innocent explanation to it all, but they soon realized that the situation was a lot more serious. The searches for the 2 individuals became more urgent as time without a single sighting pressed on. The number of police and investigators involved in the searches continued to rise. With so much effort put into these searches, the 2 friends were never located. The searches have been coordinated by the Picton authorities before Area Controller Inspector Steve Caldwell had taken over. The Navy, as well as the Air Force, have been asked to keep a lookout for the vessel, as described by Wallace. Commercial fishing boats, boating clubs, as well as waterside lodges were all asked to assist in the investigation as well. 5 days after the initial disappearance, there had been unconfirmed speculation in the media that the missing people case should be upgraded to a full-on homicide investigation. Steve Caldwell expressed that upgrading it to this would mean that additional resources could now be brought in. During this time, the authorities were focused on trying to identify the yacht that the 2 friends had supposedly boarded, according to Wallace. By the 10th of January, at least 300 people had been interviewed. The investigation was named Operation Tam. Initially, Guy Wallace was seen as a suspect up until 5 months later of the investigation. The mystery man was found to be an individual named Scott Watson. The vessel in question belonged to Watson, and DNA belonging to Olivia had been discovered on it, which gave authorities enough evidence to arrest the man. He was then charged with the homicide of the 2 friends, Ben Smart and Olivia Hope. He continues to maintain his innocence and points to Guy Wallace, the water taxi driver. There have been other witnesses as well in regards to identifying the mystery man as Watson, but there are some claims that state that the mystery man had been treated unjustly. This case still needs to be solved, and neither one of the young friends has been found. Watson has since been found guilty of the homicide, which occurred in January of 1998. The following image appears as any other school photograph. This one was taken in the year of 1999 at Columbine High School. While this photograph appears as any other, with teenagers having fun and striking poses, in the top left corner, something out of sorts can be seen. 3 of the students can be seen making a gesture as if they're holding firearms. This would go on to be an important aspect a few weeks later. 2 of the students were Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold. The 2 friends would go on to perform an attack on the school only a few weeks after the picture was taken. This incident was said to be one of the worst in American history. 15 individuals lost their lives that day, including the 2 attackers. 12 students had been fatally wounded, along with one of the teachers of the school. Harris was 18 years old at the time, and Klebold was 17. The two entered the school grounds of the Jefferson County Columbine High School on the 20th of April, 1999, armed with various weapons and even explosives. In under 20 minutes, the lives of 13 people ended. 21 others had also been critically wounded. As authorities began investigating the premises, they discovered another 2 explosives in the cafeteria. Should these 2 have detonated, the toll of lives lost would have been significantly higher. When the story spread throughout the world, there was outrage as to how long the police response had taken. The attack had concluded by noon, but the authorities didn't move into the area of the attack until they were certain that all dangers had been cleared. During that time of waiting, a few of the students had passed after not receiving any assistance. After this incident, there was debate regarding this kind of violent act in schools, and numerous schools across the country began to invest in security guards as well as metal detectors. A few years later, diary entries, maps, and other documents were released, which offered an insight into the minds of the 2 attackers in the months leading up to the strike on the school. A calendar entry was dated as the same day that the attack occurred. This time, 10 minutes past 11 had been written at the top of the page. This is believed to have been the time that the 2 individuals had pulled out their weapons within the school grounds. In the diary, the following notions were made, quote, "Get nails, get propane, fill my clips, and finish fuses." Documentation also revealed that Harris had written a statement that expressed that he and Klebold had hoped to carry out an even larger attack. He detailed that he specifically wanted to bring harm to the family of one of his former friends. The teenager made another chilling statement in which he said that he wanted to leave an impression on the world. This came after he detailed that he wanted to set off explosives all around the area, including houses, roads, and gas stations. He referenced World War II as well as many other horrific crimes, which he compared to the attacks that he wished to pursue. It was later found that in one of the school papers, Harris had written about other historical horrific incidents. Harris was to attend a court-ordered anger management class after he and Klebold had broken into a vehicle in 1998. He had stated in one of his papers, quote, "I believe the most valuable part of this class was thinking up ideas for ways to control anger and for ways to release stress in a nonviolent manner." Entries from Harris's father's journals were also released as part of the documentation. Some of the entries were addressing threats that Harris had made against one of his classmates in 1998. The classmate was Brooks Brown, who reported that Harris had in fact threatened him in the early months of 1998. In Harris's father Wayne's journal, he expressed a statement which stated that they feel victimized and that Eric is not at fault. He further stated that Brown was out to get him and that he had problems. He detailed Brown as a manipulative con artist. Brian Rohrbuff was one of the fathers of one of the students, Daniel, who had lost his life during the attack. Brian said that he had not read any of these documents, but was struck by the fact that Wayne was keeping track of his son Eric's problems. He expresses that these journals detail just how dangerous Eric Harris really was. 3 U.S. Navy videos have recently been released by the Department of Defense, which contained footage of some unidentified aerial phenomena. Although the government believes something significant has been captured on these 3 videos, they're not exactly sure as to what. The videos that were released by the department and the Pentagon have for some time stirred up speculation of UAPs for ages. The release of these videos was meant to clear up the misconceptions as to whether or not these 3 specific videos are real or not. The videos are in fact 100% real. The videos are said to have been captured by naval aviators, which shows some unidentified objects hurling through the sky. One of them can be seen rotating against the wind, and the pilots can be heard within their aircraft expressing confusion. Upon the video's first appearance online, new life has been sparked into the debate as to whether or not we have extraterrestrial beings coming to our Earth. The release of these videos has also sparked the interest of enthusiasts and their search for extraterrestrial life forms. It's encouraged by experts, however, that sightings such as these usually have some sort of earthly explanation. Between 2017 and 2018, The videos were published by the New York Times and another company known as To the Stars Academy of Arts and Sciences, which also provoked the hope of the sign of alien life. The Navy pilots had expressed that these strange objects seemed to defy all laws of physics. Then some details came about referring to some sort of 5-year Pentagon program, as well as the claims of metal alloy that was supposedly recovered from one of these unidentified objects. Harry Reid, the former Senate Majority Leader and Democrat of Nevada, had spoken of his push for more research to be conducted on these unidentified flying objects. The release of these 3 videos for Reid had been a slight glimpse into UFOs for the public, as well as other aerial and space phenomena that they'd yet to learn of. Reid stated the following in a Twitter post, saying, quote, "I'm glad the Pentagon is finally releasing this footage, but it only scratches the surface of research and materials available." He went on to say that the United States needs to take such things more seriously and have a scientific look into the matter, as well as the potential threats these objects may pose to national security. He also expressed that the people of America deserve to be informed of such ordeals. The Pentagon did not explain exactly what may be happening in these 3 videos. It was disclosed that these videos were taken in 2004 and early 2015 over the Pacific Ocean and off the East Coast. A Pentagon spokesperson, Susan Goff, had stated that the Navy have considered such objects in these videos as unidentified and also confirmed that these videos were captured by aviators. Interestingly, in 2017, Tom DeLonge, co-frontman of Blink-182, along with former government employees, had founded the aforementioned To the Stars Academy of Art and Sciences. This is a private company that collects documentation and other material relating to UAPs and thoroughly investigates them. DeLonge had stated that the release of the videos was monumental news and that it removed the doubt around the legitimacy of such evidence relating to the unidentified aerial phenomena. He stated in an email that release is the level of recognition that is needed to eliminate the skepticism that surrounds the events of UAPs. He continues by saying that after this, they can now move forward by sharing and analyzing data from respected institutions. Progress is being made on the matter of identifying these strange occurrences. Astrophysicists may have other explanations for such happenings, though. They range from atmospheric effects, bugs in the code of imaging, display systems of the fighter jets, or simply just reflections. It's noted, though, that the crazy conspiracy theorists may not be so crazy after all. In 2004, Rachel O'Reilly had her life taken at her home in Knoll County, Dublin. Rachel's mother, Rose, and her husband, Joe, both appeared on The Late Late Show as they appealed to the public for more information on the unsolved crime that took the life of their daughter and a wife. Little did Rose, or anyone for that matter, know that Joe had been the one behind the homicide. It was noted that Joe's appearance on the show was generally very strange. He appeared calm and collected for someone who had discovered that his wife had lost her life. Rachel's brother, Paul, had also explained that before Rose and Joe went out onto the show, his mother's stomach was in a knot, but Joe was eating plates of sandwiches and apparently incredibly calm, while simultaneously chatting away on the cell phone. It was stated that going on live TV and not having a nerve in your body was incredibly bizarre, and that for Joe this was a performance. Joe had tried to paint himself as the perfect husband, while detailing how he had proposed to Rachel underneath the Eiffel Tower. Rose appears visibly devastated during the interview. When she was asked more about Rachel, she expressed that she was brilliant, and it was inconceivable the way that her life had been ended. She maintained that her daughter did not deserve that. Joe, however, appeared relatively calm. He pointed to the idea of how much evidence must have been on the person who took her life based on the extent of her injuries. He continued to detail various things, such as DNA that could be found on that person's car, and whether it was on their hands, face, or hair. This interview left more questions than answers relating to Joe's involvement, but he was later found guilty of the crime. Paul expressed his opinion on the matter, stating that he didn't decide to take her life a day or even a month prior, but had been thinking of this for a rather long time. Paul also believed that Joe was a psychopath, and that Joe wanted all of this to play out exactly as it had. Joe had been arrested 4 times, but Detective Inspector Pat Mary didn't hold him as there was insufficient evidence tying him to the case. Producers of a series called The Case I Can't Forget alleged that Joe had lied to Rose before they appeared on The Late Late Show. Originally, Rose did not want to attend the show, but Joe told her that the guards said that she should. This was a lie that got Rose to do the appeal through the talk show. It was later believed that Joe had taken the life of Rachel so that he could be with another woman that he'd been seeing. The talk show had offered Rose and Joe a hotel room, but Joe had turned it down and instead told his limousine driver to take him to the woman's house with whom he was having this alleged affair with, which during this time he'd been lying about. Detective Pat had also been in the interview and was asked how it felt sitting across from the man who had taken Rachel's life. He had already known that he had done it, but was unable to prove it at the time. There had been a mutual hatred between Joe and Detective Pat, and once Joe had been released from prison, he'd made an offensive gesture at the detective. During this time, there was still insufficient evidence. Joe O'Reilly had taken the life of his 30-year-old wife in Lambat View and staged the whole ordeal as a burglary. Various attempts were made to have him incarcerated, but that proved rather difficult. In 2007, though, Joe was jailed for life. The jury at the Central Criminal Court had come back with a unanimous verdict of guilty, which sent O'Reilly to a mandatory life sentence. It's rather odd and disturbing how one can appear on a talk show after having just taken the life of a loved one and act as though nothing had even happened. Local news footage showed what seemed to be a concerned neighbor speaking with the reporter. The neighbor had been a man named Stephen McDaniel. The reporter was there to cover a recent story on the homicide of a local woman whose body had just been uncovered. McDaniel had described the victim as a kind person, but shortly into the interview, things took a strange turn. The reporter mentioned that the body of the victim had been found. At this point, he turned very pale and repeated the word body. He looked visibly unwell and stated that he needed to sit down. In June of 2011, 27-year-old Lauren Giddings had her life taken from her. Giddings had been attending law school along with her neighbor, Stephen Mark McDaniel, who would become the lead suspect in the case. The two students had lived in close proximity to one another and the campus. This would allow McDaniel to keep an eye on the woman that he was obsessed with. This fact would later be used in what had unfolded when Giddings' life was taken. The two individuals did not share any significant relationship and had rather limited interactions with one another. McDaniel appeared to be a quiet, introverted student, but he was hiding a dark obsession that he had with the victim. He was, in fact, stalking Giddings and gathering information about her and her whereabouts. Additionally, he had also collected a lot of digital data on the woman as discovered on his laptop, which was later confiscated to be used as evidence. Some believe that the new footage of McDaniel shows the exact moment that he knew he would be caught, and that he was. Just one day after the body was discovered, McDaniel was viewed as a person of interest and then became the main suspect. Stephen McDaniel broke into Lauren Giddings' apartment with the use of a stolen master key, which clearly indicated that this was premeditated. He then took the life of the woman and continued on with his normal life. Before he was arrested, McDaniel would watch as the authorities came to the apartment to conduct their investigations. He refused to let them into his apartment and denied them a thorough search. He had cited his rights to protect his personal space. Upon the discovery of Giddings, neighbors, including McDaniel, were taken to the station to get statements on Giddings' initial disappearance. At this point, none of the individuals knew of the discovery of the woman. McDaniel would only come to learn this during the interview with the reporter. His reaction during this turned from concern into complete visible panic, which only supported the authorities in viewing him as a suspect. The detectives were eventually able to do a search of his apartment, where they discovered the master key and other items that would implicate him in Giddings' homicide. Along with this evidence were videos showing McDaniel looking into the windows at Giddings. Authorities had also found blogs and forums where the offender expressed his hatred for women, as well as his desire to bring harm to them, which further built a case against McDaniel. With all of this evidence now in their possession, detectives interrogated the offender again, and this time he accidentally revealed another crucial piece of evidence. He didn't admit to taking the life of Giddings, but did express that he'd broken into her apartment, and so he was arrested on charges of burglary. Not long after, he was charged with the homicide of Lauren Giddings. This was the start of the proceedings against the assailant that would eventually go on to convict him of this serious crime. McDaniel then went on to file appeals and petitions to overturn his convictions, and in December, it was stated that he lost another road. The U.S. District Court Judge Mark Treadwell had dismissed the claims of prosecutors using stolen documents against him. The judge did not state that this claim was untrue, but did maintain that McDaniel had missed the deadline that would allow him to file his petition. McDaniel was already caught the moment that he'd done the news interview and had been brought to justice for his heinous crime. Probably one of the best videos relating to evidence of extraterrestrial life was one that was taken by David Eckhart, who's from Pensacola, Florida, a non-high UFO traffic area. Ever since he was young, Eckhart claimed to have been visited by some very strange creatures and had set up various experiments in attempts to capture them on video. One such video, in his adulthood, had shown a rather odd result. Eckhart had set up a camera above his bed as part of one of these experiments. It's alleged that he was actually able to capture an alien creeping into his room while he was asleep one evening. Eckhart was stunned when he played back the footage the following morning, only to see a humanoid creature enter the doorway just a few feet from where he was asleep. The yellow-tinted light outside of the room added to the eeriness. A small extraterrestrial being can be seen poking its head around the corner and then coming into full view. It looked to be rather thin in diameter and stood at maybe 2 or 3 feet tall. Eckhart expressed that this was not the first time that he had seen one of these beings. The video was taken in 2006 and has recently appeared on an episode of The Proof is Out There. The show had suggested that the alien has many features consistent with that of a gray alien. Gray aliens are described as having long, skinny legs. They also point out that the head shape was very similar. An author and journalist named Alexis Brooks explained that this is very rare that they've ever come across a person who's had only one singular experience with a gray alien. They went on to say that usually there are multiple experiences that go back to the individual's childhood. The video received some commentary from skeptics. One had said that the resolution of the video coincides with the year that it was taken, but that it should have been able to focus in from a distance, and he doesn't believe the video is real. Another pointed out that each time such a video is captured, it's always blurry. Eckhart has spoken of his childhood and adulthood experiences with the aliens on a few different podcasts, and he maintains that they're real. He believes that these humanoid creatures have been following him and his family since he was a child. David Eckhart and his wife Jean had also appeared on Fact or Faked in 2011. They expressed that they'd been seeing people around the house but didn't want to directly name them as aliens and stated that they just had dark eyes. Jean stated that she didn't know what they were, but described them as creatures from the movie Predator. She went on to say that their visits had been happening frequently, even before they'd moved into that house. Eckhart further explained that these creatures can also be touched, even in their transparent state, and he describes it as feeling like wet, static electricity. He was also asked if any part of his claims were a hoax, and he replied saying that he would put his hand on a Bible. He maintains that all of this was just part of an experiment that yielded results one time. Phantoms and Monsters also covered the Eckhart alien ordeal. It stated that Eckhart and his family had experienced this for over a decade at 2 different residences in the Florida area. It's noted that these creatures can move rather quickly at remarkable speeds. According to this site, Eckhart had also been subjected to being controlled by these alien creatures, including being experimented on. According to this individual, this is not the first claim he's come across in relation to alien experiences and abduction events. One of those claims was that those who are being abducted are related to an ancient hybrid line. It's suggested that these aliens are hunting down and disposing of this hybrid race. According to some of these claims, individuals have undergone invasive experiments and are then disposed of in a cylindrical incinerator, which the writer suggests supports his theory even further. While it may seem impossible to ever know what appeared in David Eckhart's room that evening, there are some theorists and alien hunters working the case. The outcome may be more likely with the recent government developments relating to UFOs. Michael Diamond is an alternative entertainer who exhibits some rare artifacts in his sideshows in the United Kingdom. His shows consist of items such as the elephant-headed boy, which had come from the Braiding Waxwork Museum. He also has a collection of axes and Houdini's handcuffs on display. All of these items were displayed in his freak room. In this room, in the corner, covered with a blanket, was a curious artifact. It was Mr. Fritz, a ventriloquist doll that's said to be haunted. Only the doll's head remains mounted on a wooden stick. The painted face has become warped over time and has begun peeling. The Freak Room is said to be the final resting place of this haunted doll. Mr. Fritz had struggled to find such a place since 1945. Some viewers of the creepy ventriloquist doll believe that he's very much alive. Much of Diamond's collectibles were acquired through financial investments. Mr. Fritz, however, he'd gotten for free. He explains that this was not particularly unusual, since a lot of people find dolls, especially ventriloquist ones, to be rather creepy. Some of these puppets often end up being thrown away or locked in the attic. Fortunately, for people such as Diamond, sometimes these dolls find their way to him. A camera was mounted in the Freak Room and pointed directly at the display that housed Mr. Fritz, and what it captured was truly disturbing. In the black and white video, you can see the Mr. Fritz doll, and a few seconds in, the display door swings right open. The ventriloquist doll's eyes then start to blink, and its mouth begins to move. Throughout the course of the video, the scary puppet seems to repeat these movements every couple of seconds. It was filmed by Diamond, who was also spooked by the ordeal and stated that he had no idea why the puppet was moving on its own. Diamond was approached by a World War II military dealer at a festival in Liverpool. The man had noted the oddities present in Diamond's exhibitions and thought Mr. Fritz would fit well in there. The doll had been uncovered in an antique mall in Myrtle Beach. The dealer had heard that the doll had a connection to a German camp during the war and decided to make the purchase and bring him back to the United Kingdom. It's reported that this is when strange things started to happen. The dealer, before handing the doll over to Diamond, had him locked in a display case but would often find the display wide open the following morning. The dealer would then notice the change in mouth position and that the doll's eyes would sometimes be wide open instead of closed. The man thought of every possible answer as to why the doll would do this. He even considered a change in humidity or that a mouse had made a nest within the puppet. He soon found that it was neither of these things. After numerous more times of finding the same thing happening, the dealer taped the display shut. The next day, the tape had been peeled back and the display door was once again open. He then placed Mr. Fritz in the garden shed where he lived for the next 6 months. After this, his child reportedly heard laughter emitting from the shed and no one would go near it while the doll was in there. This was the deciding factor that Mr. Fritz had to go. So the ventriloquist dummy ended up with Michael Diamond. Upon placing the doll in his Freak Room, things began to happen almost immediately. The display door would be found open, but at first it was only once or twice a week. Soon it became a nearly daily occurrence that the display door would be found wide open. Diamond found that one morning, not only did the display open, but it had been moved about 6 inches from its original position. In September of 2019, the video footage that's seen here was taken over the course of 2 nights. The story behind Mr. Fritz was also a little strange. He was accompanied by a handwritten note that detailed that Mr. Fritz was a ventriloquist doll that was used to entertain the Allied POWs during the Second World War between 1943 and 1945. Mr. Fritz was created by a prisoner in one of many camps as the prisoners would try to keep themselves entertained. This prisoner was Private Billy Booth, who had previously been a children's entertainer as well as a puppeteer. He created the doll from German newspapers that were soaked in potato starch. Booth had managed to smuggle in a pot of pink gloss that had come from a Polish farmer. The farmer had given him the paint to use on his daughter's cot. He used this paint to color the doll. Billy Booth and Mr. Fritz had entertained the prisoners for almost 18 months. Booth had passed away, and once the camp was liberated, one of the prisoners took Mr. Fritz back to Booth's family. The exact circumstances surrounding how Mr. Fritz ended up at the Antiques Mall remains a mystery. The 17th of September, 2021, a 28-year-old woman was discovered in southeast London in Cater Park in Kidbrooke. She was later identified as Sabina Nessa, a rushy green primary school teacher. She was said to have been attacked after leaving her residence at around 8:30 in the evening in Astell Road. It was detailed that she would be meeting up with a friend at the Depot bar. It would have taken Sabina 5 minutes to get from her residence to the bar. Her body was found near a walkway the next day by a member of the public walking their dog in Cater Park. A man said to be in his 40s was later arrested on suspicion of the homicide, but was released as the case was under investigation and no evidence held him in custody. Not long after, another arrest was made after CCTV footage was released along with images which show a man wearing a dark-colored shirt and gray pants. The man can be seen walking into view of the camera with something in his hands that authorities believe may be vital to the case. He was seen looking over his shoulder before pulling up his hoodie. The video was taken in Pegler Square on the night that Sabina had been attacked. A CCTV image of a silver-colored vehicle was also released and was believed to have belonged to the suspect in question. Detective Chief Inspector from the Met's Special Crime Command, Neil John, explained that his team was working tirelessly to bring a suspect to justice from the homicide, which he said was inclusive of a thorough search of CCTV footage. He also asked anyone in the Kidbrooke, Lewisham, and Greenwich area to look closely at the images and the video provided of the man, in hopes that someone will be able to identify him. A map image of the main locations of the investigation was also provided. John also explained that the images have gained a lot of coverage in a short period of time, and a week into the investigation of the woman's homicide, the department had made good progress. Anyone who had any information on the individual was encouraged to get a hold of the incident room on 020-872-14266. Alternatively, they were asked to contact Crime Stoppers anonymously on 0800-555-111. Additionally, tips can be sent to the email address tips@dailymail.com. During this time, a 38-year-old man was being questioned while authorities were on the hunt for the balding and bearded individual who was seen in the 12-second video footage. An organization called Reclaim These Streets had set up a vigil after a previous homicide in the area of Sarah Everard. At the vigil, the images of the suspect had been released. Sabina's sister, Jabina Yasmin Islam, also urged everyone to stay safe during this time. She stated that she and the family are shocked at the events that took her sister's life. They didn't expect something such as this to ever happen to them. Sabina's cousin, Zubel Ahmed, expressed that she was a beautiful soul and loved teaching. Sabina was detailed as a caring and kind person. A new statement was later released by Sabina's family. After the extensive search of the CCTV footage, one video showed how Sabina was attacked. It was alleged that her body was then placed over the suspect's shoulder and carried to the area in which they had found her. The report of this attack came after the authorities had released their own CCTV footage and images. It's believed that Sabina had been attacked with an object to the head. Assistant Commissioner Rolfe stated that the Metropolitan Police are not requesting that women change any of their behavior in reference to going out in the evenings due to the homicide of Sabina Nessa. This was right after information sheets were being handed out to women advising them on how to stay safe at night. These information sheets were being handed out by a community group. Trevor Laurie, Detective Chief Superintendent, expressed that the streets are safe for women, and he would like to reassure the public of that statement. But the hunt for the assailant continues. Assistant Commissioner Rolfe went on to say that violence against women is a priority for the police departments across the UK. But they're also conscious that women should be allowed to be free and carry on with their normal lives without having to fear for their lives. She expressed that the departments are trying their best to bring these offenders to justice and prevent such offenses where they can. The Duchess of Cambridge had also shared her thoughts on the events that unfolded and stated that she was saddened by the loss of another woman who was innocently walking on the street. As for the school head of Sabina Nessa's workplace, Lisa Williams had described the young woman as a brilliant teacher who was dedicated to her students. It's uncertain as to why anyone would want to bring harm to the young schoolteacher, or if she had any enemies. Luckily, the offender was later identified, apprehended, and charged. The man in question was named Kosi Salamach, and he was given a life sentence at the Old Bailey prison. He'll be serving a minimum of 36 years. Neil John described the offender as evil, and it was found that he had a history of domestic violence and had driven all the way to London from Eastbourne, East Sussex, to carry out the homicide. It's still not been determined as to why the assailant would have taken the life of the young teacher, and when he appeared in court, he was asked why he had done this, to which he responded by saying that he could not help the court and accepted the consequences for what he had done. Salamaj's lawyer, Lewis Power QC, had been questioned by the judge, and he stated that his client had offered no challenge to the prosecution. He initially took responsibility for the homicide, but then pleaded not guilty on the 16th of December. The following year, on the 25th of February though, the plea was changed again to guilty. On the 12th of February in 2020, Jakes Vandermeer survived an attempted assassination. Vandermeer is a Cape Town, South African attorney. He had driven outside of his home in Gardens, Cape Town, and stopped his Toyota Land Cruiser. A masked man who was allegedly following him the whole morning had driven up to the driver's side window and fired twice at the attorney. Vandermeer explained that he heard a loud bang before glass was shattered all over him. Right after that, he expressed feeling as though someone had hit him on the back of the neck with a baseball bat. After Vandermeer realized that he'd been severely wounded, he stumbled into his home and told his wife what had happened. He said that she was a tough person and did not immediately panic, but instead she got him into the car and drove him to the emergency room. At the hospital, the attorney was told that it was a miracle that he was still alive. The wound had been 1 millimeter away from causing his carotid artery to rupture, which would have ended his life. It lodged into his vertebrae as well. He explained that he should not be alive, or at least should have been paralyzed. Jakes Vandermeer said that he could not think of anyone who would have carried out this attack on him, but CCTV footage did capture a rather suspicious-looking man. In the footage, a man wearing a face mask, sunglasses, a Springbok cap, a gray shirt, and dark pants can be seen walking along the pavement when he stops and turns only to carry on for a few more steps down the pavement. He stops again to look around. Half an hour later, Jakes Vandermeer's car can be seen entering Constantia Street in his Toyota, and after a few seconds, a silver Hyundai H1 can be seen entering the same street, following the attorney. Footage from another camera angle shows Vandermeer pulling over on the side of the road outside of his home. After a few moments, the suspect rolls up in his silver vehicle alongside the Toyota and fires 2 shots before driving off. Vandermeer can be seen stumbling out of his vehicle, clutching his neck and making his way toward the house. The victim expressed that they'll not be operating because it's not causing any immediate issues, so the item is still lodged in his neck. The authorities are tracking down any leads that may come up while they try to figure out who the man was. The number plates of the Hyundai H1 are said to have been cloned. Sergeant Sean Burdine of the Central Police Station in Cape Town is asking for assistance from the public in identifying the man in the footage. He goes on to say that he has an unusual walk and build, and they believe that someone must know who the man is exactly. Anyone who has any information regarding this ordeal or is able to identify the suspect is urged to contact the authorities on 0824-693-176 or 073-220-0653. Alternatively, Crime Stoppers can be contacted on 086-001-0111, or you can submit a report or a tip through the mobile application called MYSAPS. Vandermeer explained that he wishes to know who this person is who wished to take his life, so that he may have the opportunity to apologize to them and speak to the people involved. He works in civil litigation, which is said to be a harmless line of work. The attorney has been trying to figure out who would want to take his life, but no one has come to mind. Although an attempt to take his life was made, he still believes that something good will come from the matter and says that God had saved his life. He wants the opportunity to forgive the person who had attacked him and would also like some sort of explanation. A case of attempted homicide has been opened and the assailant remains at large. Sergeant Bardine hopes that the suspect's unusual walking style, as well as his build, could help track him down. Even though the attorney might want to forgive the perpetrator, the authorities want the man responsible behind bars for such a crime. 4 students belonging to the University of Idaho had their lives taken from them in 2022. The victims were 20-year-old Ethan Chapin, 21-year-old Madison Mogan, 20-year-old Zana Kernodle, and 21-year-old Kaylee Goncalves. On the Friday evening of the 12th of November, Goncalves and Mogan had gone to the Corner Club bar situated in Moscow, as stated by Moscow authorities. Chapin and Kernodle, who were a couple at the time, had gone to the Sigma Chai House that same night. There were 2 other victims who had survived, but they're not considered to be suspects in this case. The following morning, at around 20 to 2, Goncalves and Mogan had been caught on video at the Grub Truck, which is a food vendor. They were driven home by another person and arrived there at 1:45. Both the vendor and the driver are also not considered to be involved in any way. Chapin and Kernodle arrived at the place at 1:45 as well. Although he didn't live there, Chapin was staying over with his girlfriend. The attacks are believed to have unfolded between 4 a.m. and 4:25. According to documentation, Kernodle had gotten a DoorDash order at 4 p.m. One of the surviving roommates allegedly woke up and heard what they believed to be Goncalves playing with her dog. The roommate then believed they heard Goncalves say something along the lines of "there's someone here." Records show that Kernodle had been on TikTok around 12 minutes past 4, so this could have been what the roommate was hearing. The roommate explained that she looked out her bedroom but didn't see anything. She then opened the door a second time, only to hear crying coming from Kernodle's room, followed by a male voice saying, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." She then saw a man wearing black clothes and a mask as he walked past her. She couldn't identify the man, who she stated was 5 foot 10 inches tall. She recalled that he looked athletic and had bushy eyebrows. At 17 minutes past 4, a surveillance camera that was situated less than 50 feet away from Kernodle's room recorded a barking dog and distorted audio of what sounded like a whimper before a loud noise. At 58 minutes past 11, the 911 call was made by one of the roommates who believed one of the victims to be unconscious. When the police arrived, they discovered all 4 victims were no longer alive. After the victims had been discovered, authorities had a look at the surrounding security cameras. They'd seen the suspect's Hyundai Elantra go past the house 3 times and then a 4th. The vehicle's journey was tracked all the way to Pullman, Washington that evening. On the 29th of November, the authorities were on the lookout for a white Elantra. A Washington State University officer had searched cars on the university campus that matched the description, and he eventually found it. On the 7th of December, it was announced that the authorities were looking to speak with the driver of the Hyundai. Moscow Police Captain Roger Lanier stated that even though it had been a month since the homicides, the case had not gone cold, and the department received tips daily. The suspect was then identified as Brian Kohberger, who lived in Pullman, who was stopped for traffic violations on the 15th of December. Kohberger and his father had been driving, with Kohberger in the driver's seat. They'd been pulled over by the Hancock County Sheriff's Office for speeding, and only 9 minutes later they were stopped again, this time for following another vehicle too closely. On the 27th of December, DNA belonging to Kohberger was found on the weapon that was used. His phone was also tracked, and it was found that he was heading to Moscow before the homicides were carried out. The device was off between 2:47 and 4:48 in the morning hours, according to police, who believed that he was trying to conceal his location. It was shown that at 9 a.m., he had returned to the same house where he had just attacked the 4 students. Kohberger was arrested on the 30th of December in Pennsylvania's Pocono Mountains. On the 3rd of January, he agreed to be extradited to Idaho for his court appearance due to take place in Monroe County. On the 5th of January, the charges for the crime were read. The judge expressed that each student had been a victim of homicide with premeditation and malice with forethought. The video footage that was found showed a person believed to be Kohberger, dressed in all black, walking near the victim's place of residence, while more footage revealed the Hyundai making its various passes. Body camera footage was also released showing the police officers who had pulled Kohberger over for his traffic violations. A memorial was held for Ethan Chapin on the 21st of November. His mother, Stacy Chapin, described him as one of the most incredible people you would ever meet. He laughed a lot and smiled when he woke up and would still be smiling when he went to bed. He was detailed as being kind to everyone and a friend to all. Goncalves' father, Steve, explained that the 4 victims had not suffered and didn't lay around for hours waiting, and so an earlier phone call to the authorities would most likely not have saved their lives. Mogan's father, Ben, stated that Madison Mogan had been his only child and described her as smart, funny, and beautiful. Goncalves and Mogan were best friends and had been since the 6th grade. They passed away in the same room on the same bed, as explained by Steve Goncalves. At this point, authorities don't know why Kohberger carried out this heinous crime. though it stated that he was likely driven by hatred. A 21-year-old man named Ronald Scott was found with multiple wounds to his body as he lay deceased near Angel Town Park on Morrison Road in Brixton. He was discovered on the 4th of September around midday after having sustained an attack and stumbling to a playground. He was pronounced deceased at the scene when the authorities arrived. Police later released CCTV of who they believed to be the suspects involved in the case. Detective Chief Inspector Kate Blackburn, the lead in the investigation, stated that they've examined CCTV footage from around the area and will be releasing it in hopes that someone may be able to identify the individuals. It was stated that Scott had staggered all the way to a playground that had been close to his residence and passed away in front of his mother. Paramedics and officers desperately tried to save him, but to no avail. The attack took place in broad daylight, and authorities are uncertain as to why it may have occurred. The CCTV footage shows two men dressed in black and wearing black shoes with white soles running up the road away from the scene of the crime. Unfortunately, their faces could not be seen in the footage, and they're yet to be identified. No arrests have been made. Detective Blackburn stated that if anyone saw or heard anything, they're encouraged to tell the authorities. Such details, no matter how insignificant, could give confirmation to other details that were not supported previously. She goes on to say that witnesses don't have to speak directly to them and can make contact with them through two other sources, one of which is Crime Stoppers, which is entirely anonymous. The details of your identity will not be passed on to the authorities as they're an independent organization. Another method is to submit CCTV footage, images, doorbell or dashcam videos or other information to a link for public portal with the web address mipp.police.uk. This too can be done anonymously. Neighbors explained that the young man was also known as Skengroy and had been wounded multiple times with a sharpened blade. It had been his sister who sounded the alarm when she saw him at the gate of the park. It was stated that the victim had recently begun a course in construction and had been trying to find a job in the building trade. Witnesses are urged to call the authorities on 101 or contact them at METCC. They ask that the following case number be quoted: CAD 3184/04SEP. Crime Stoppers can also be contacted through 0800-555-111, where a tip and other information can be submitted to crimestoppers-uk.org. Body camera footage was released of the arrest of a homicide suspect, Shanasia Jones, and her accomplice, Walter Clay Robinson. The two were apprehended at a Walmart in Cleveland, Ohio. The arrest took place on the 13th of August in 2023. The two suspects were to face menacing stalking charges. Jones, however, would be facing an additional charge of homicide. The allegations against the two suspects have been kept under wraps by the Cleveland Police Department. The body camera footage reveals a police officer venturing through the Walmart area in pursuit of Jones. Jones is seen wearing a white shirt and sporty pants. At 20 to 6 in the afternoon, the camera footage reveals the chase of Jones as she makes a desperate sprint up the aisles when she's spotted the officials. She was asked to stop running various times. She continued to run throughout the store as the situation escalated. Another officer can be seen strategically blocking any escape route that Jones may try to take. The footage concluded as Jones was tackled to the ground by an officer, and she raised her hands in submission. A second video was captured on the same day around 5:45 in the afternoon of the arrest of Jones's accomplice, Walter Robinson. He was captured in the Walmart parking lot. Officials had run after him, which caused him to re-enter the store, which quickly prompted exits to be secured. Robinson was arrested in a black shirt and was apprehended near the Walmart entrance. After the successful detainment of Robinson, the officer regrouped and escorted the two suspects to the parking lot. The officer who had captured her then read Jones her rights and also notified her of her police custody status. The allegations against them are still said to be a mystery, and the stalking charges are said to still be under investigation. It was later alleged that Cleveland homicide detectives believed that Jones had taken part in a firearm-related incident that left one man deceased and another critically wounded. This took place on the southeast side in June. Detectives also believe that Robinson and Jones had gone to that specific Walmart on various days and stared down one of the employees who's a relative of one of the victims. The county prosecutors charged Jones with homicide and felony assault. The incident involving a firearm remains under investigation. Both of the suspects have also been charged with stalking and obstruction. At the store, Jones allegedly told the officers that she'd not done anything. When they'd asked Robinson why he ran away, he responded saying it was because Jones was running and the officers were chasing her. The official told him that that's not how it works. It's stated that Jones is being charged with homicide due to a complex set of events that are still in the process of being pieced together. Not much information has been revealed about the victim of the crime, and the details surrounding the case are rather unusual and vague. The lack of clarity did, however, lead to the spreading of rumors by the community. 18-year-old Jamie Maya lost his life after he was met with an incident involving a sharpened blade in Hall Lane, Armley in March. West Yorkshire Police homicide detectives and the Major Inquiry Team had begun a homicide investigation. 4 suspects were later identified as Aquaid Jeffords, Enham Nishat, and Caleb Ah, who were all 20 years old at the time. Along with them was Renee Wilkes, who was age 22. The 4 suspects had fled the country before they were ever even identified. West Yorkshire Police had discovered that the men had fled to Liverpool. Detective Chief Inspector Damien Roebuck expressed that the family remains heartbroken and that the department is determined to find the answers they need and bring the offenders to justice. He went on to explain that information from the public plays a vital role in these efforts, and they're appealing to anyone who has information regarding the individuals who were captured on CCTV in Liverpool. 4 men were previously arrested, aged 18, 19, 24, and 30, but were discounted from being involved in the homicide. The young man had passed away in the hospital a short while after the fatal wounding. A 16-year-old boy who was involved in the attack was also seriously wounded but luckily survived. In the CCTV images, one of the men can be seen wearing a lightly colored hoodie with a blue shirt and blue pants. The second man is wearing all black with a white shirt and white shoes. The third can be seen dressed in all green of different shades and white shoes, while the last man is wearing all black. An arrest may be easier since all 4 assailants have been identified. All 4 men are from Leeds and were involved in the attack, which occurred on the 31st of March. Detectives are carrying out all inquiries in an attempt to locate them, and have also been utilizing the help of the Crown Prosecution Service. The 4 men are now wanted for the homicide of Jamie Maya and the attempted homicide of another person. It was found that they'd traveled to Liverpool before leaving the country, and their whereabouts remain unknown. This is why information from the public is regarded as of vital importance. What seems to be just a regular image of a group of men holds a lot more than you might think. If anyone has any information regarding the individuals, they're encouraged to make contact with HMED on 101, including Operation Plunkett with the reference number 1323-018-0255. In 2014, an eerie image emerged. A trail camera was set up in a forest area and managed to capture some deer. Except one of the images caught something rather strange. In the image, you can see a pair of lights gleaming over the deer's head. This, of course, sparked questions about UFOs. Those who manufactured these cameras, however, have a different answer. They explained that the lights were nothing more than a reflection from the deer's eyes. The individual who set up the trail cameras, Rainer Shaddles, is not so convinced. Shaddles had set up these trail cameras around his property situated in Jackson County, Mississippi, along with his wife, Edith. Another angle of a different trail camera captures the side view of where the deer would be, and Shaddles points out a saucer-shaped object in the tree line. While skeptics may try to explain that this is just a lens flare or another camera trick, Shaddles maintained that something far more sinister was going on. He also insisted that if it was some sort of government drone that came flying through the area at night, they need to speak up. He goes on to say that the government would obviously not say anything or admit to something of that nature. The company that manufactures the trail cameras expressed that they were getting many more reports during this time that were similar to Shaddles's. They said that this was partly due to the rise of automatically triggered trail cameras and their popularity. While Shadows may use his cameras to record wildlife in these wooded areas, others may have been looking for more exotic life forms during this time. Edith and Rainer Shadows explained that they positioned cameras around their 150 acres of land to capture images of deer, but on this night, on the 16th of February in 2014, the deer were accompanied by something else. Initially, Shadows thought that the deer was being illuminated by a truck's headlights, but he thought these lights were too far off the ground, and when he had a look at the area later, there were no signs that a truck had been there, including the absence of tire tracks. Shadows and his wife were not saying that this UFO was extraterrestrial, but it was a UFO of sorts, an unidentified object in the sky. He stated the following in an interview, saying, quote, "If it's alien, I'm not sure about that, but it's definitely a UFO." He went on to say that whether it's a government drone, he wants nothing else but for one of them to step up and claim responsibility. These reported photographs are not the first images of strange things found in the woods. In fact, there was a magazine dedicated to images like Shadows'. The Field and Stream magazine is said to run an annual trail camera picture contest. The magazine even has a Facebook page where they display some of the images. Amateurs would send their strange trail cam images into the magazine, some of which would be incredible wildlife scenes or two bears that appeared to be boxing one another, and in some cases it was UFOs. The timeline of the images went as follows. At 24 minutes past 7 in the evening, the deer appeared and everything seemed normal. At 29 minutes past 7, a dim light appears, and at 35 minutes past 7 it becomes brighter. Then at 53 minutes past 7, a strange shape comes into the camera. At this point, the deer are briefly lit up, but they're not certain as to how and explain that the cameras are infrared and would not emit light. 3 minutes later, a sharper light is visible and gets closer, which appears to then focus in on this particular deer. It was said that the lights appeared as headlights that were high above the ground. Edith Shadows explains that there was also no road situated in this particular area, so a vehicle of sorts would not be possible. The unidentified object then flies away. She explains that her husband then took her to the area in the woods where the object had appeared in the trees. Shadows then explained his thoughts on the matter to his wife. In one of these images, there's a deer that appears to look at the lights which originate from nowhere. There's still a lot of mystery surrounding this photograph, but with recent developments in UFO-related subjects, this mystery may be underway to being solved. On the 15th of May in 2014, Jennifer Cahill Shadle was caught on surveillance camera while leaving a Walmart that was situated on North Atherton Street in Stage College, Pennsylvania. She was heading toward a Dollar Tree store, and later that evening she's said to have been seen near a tanning salon and a Mexican grill. But despite all these sightings, she remains a missing person and has not been seen or heard from since that evening. Jennifer did not make contact with her family or her friends, and her bank accounts were said to be inactive. Jennifer had no car or luggage with her at the time of her disappearance. She was 48 at the time she went missing, and was born on the 6th of January in 1966. Her parents described Jennifer as a fun-loving and charismatic individual who expressed an interest in art and film. Jennifer was said to have taken good care of herself, both in a mental and physical sense. At the age of 21, she'd gotten married to Sean Shadle, and the two moved to State College. They were said to be financially stable, and Sean had a successful career and was well known in the area. Sean and Jennifer had 3 children together, and later on in her life, Jennifer began attending therapy. She then moved away, but moved back a year later to be closer to her 3 children. She didn't have a permanent address, but was staying in hotels, which included a Quality Inn and the Roadway Inn. She would usually walk to places that she needed to go to, or would take a taxi there. On the day she'd gone missing, Jennifer had gone out to run some errands, one of which was at the Walmart where the last image of her was captured. Jennifer was supposed to meet with her daughter and husband that day to receive a new credit card, but she didn't arrive. That evening, it was reported that she was seen at the tanning salon at around 7 or 8. The salon owner explained that she'd come into the salon soaking wet and stated that she had lost her wallet. 2 employees attempted to help her find it but were unsuccessful. On the 20th of May, the daughter grew ever more worried and decided to contact the police. The authorities, who knew Sean and knew of his connection, believed that Jennifer had left of her own accord and decided not to investigate the matter any further. Her family then took to social media, contacted investigators, and started the search for Jennifer Shadle. An analysis of the footage was then carried out, and it was determined that she'd left the store alone at 51 minutes past 4 in the afternoon. A missing person alert had then been issued, but Jennifer was not officially entered into the system for missing people. She was only entered into the police missing person database a month later. Her belongings were retrieved by family members from the hotel that she was staying at during this time. The staff told the family that they'd been trying to reach Sean since the room had been abandoned. Sean thought that Jennifer was still alive and living somewhere else. He believed that this was the case because someone had attempted to make claims on her insurance. The family then decided to hire a private investigator to track the insurance claims and learned that they'd been from a New Jersey IP address. The investigators were unable to track the people who were involved. 4 theories then emerged on the disappearance of Jennifer Shadle. The first theory was that Sean Shadle had been involved in the matter somehow, due to the controversial divorce that the two had been going through during that period. This included alimony payments. Jennifer had paid $5,000 in alimony and disappeared after a few payments had been made. There's little evidence tying Sean to her disappearance, and no one had reported seeing the two together on the evening of her disappearance. The second theory was that Jennifer had left of her own accord and started a new life. This theory has many factors that cause a lack of support in it, though. The third theory is that Jennifer had met someone and foul play is suspected. It's theorized that she could have become involved with someone or met them while living at the hotel. She'd been seen at a restaurant a few weeks prior with a few unidentified men. The men had not yet come forward to speak about Jennifer, or when they had last seen her, or if she had told either of them anything at all. Since she would take taxis to walk to places, it's also likely that she was picked up by a stranger. The night she disappeared, it had also been raining. The fourth theory is that Jennifer possibly got into an accident, whether it was a car accident or something more sinister. Jennifer is said to have blue eyes and brown hair. She stands at a height of 5 feet and 4 inches and weighs around 112 pounds. A distinct feature is that she has a surgical scar on her stomach. Her agency case number is FTP 2014-01180. To provide the authorities with any information, you're asked to contact the Ferguson Township Police Department at 814-237-1172. In 1971, Sergio Loaiza took one of the strangest photographs of a UFO known to man. Sergio was an aerial photographer who managed to capture this image in September of 1971 while he was flying over Costa Rica. He was set out on a mission to survey the land that was going to be used for the construction of a hydroelectric project. The project was set to take place near the Arenal volcano in South America. Various high-resolution images were taken from a height of 10,000 feet above a lake and surrounding rainforest. The images were captured at 20-second intervals with an automated 100-pound camera. In one of the images, a metallic disc can be seen clear as day. It's hovering or flying between Sergio's Aero Commander F-680 and the ground. The initial image, however, was not as clear as the one pictured here. The claims of UFOs circulated after the image was enhanced. The survey of the land was orchestrated by National Geographic Costa Rica in order to study the impacts that the project would have on the land and water sources, and so the image was their property. Although this image was taken some time ago, it was only released in recent years by a citizen of Costa Rica named Esteban Carranza. Esteban's Twitter is UAP_CR. It stated that he had the contact copy of the negative image, which is in the National Archives of Costa Rica. He'd obtained this copy from his uncle, who had gotten it from the National Geographic Institute. On his Twitter, Esteban made a post that explained that he had made this high-resolution scan of the copy and met with people from the National Geographic Institute. They tracked the technician who was in charge of this camera in 1971. He explained that there was no reason for this image to have been left on his desktop. He concludes this post by stating the following, saying, quote, "Disclosure is a team effort and everyone should have this image." UAP Media explained on their website that throughout the years this image has undergone analysis by numerous experts, including Costa Rican UFO researcher Ricardo Vilches, Dr. Jacques Vallée, and Dr. Richard Haynes. Each of them had concluded that the object visible in the photograph was not due to an effect of double exposure, nor was it subject to intentional fabrication. The image, according to the experts, was 100% real. It was estimated that the metallic disc was between 120 to 220 feet in diameter. While some may think that the image was a result of some sort of lens issue, it's noted that various pictures were taken, and this photo is the only one that had the metallic disc visible in it. The image was time-stamped at 25 minutes past 8 in the morning. The image was said to be the best photo of a UFO that was ever taken by a New York Times reporter named Leslie Keene. He stated that this disc can be clearly seen with the sun reflecting off of it. He points to the fact that there's a little dot on top of the rounded object, and also alludes to the fact that this was a government photograph. The image has always been in the possession of the Costa Rican government, which only supports its authenticity. The mysterious image remains completely unexplained, but may aid in the recent UAP and UFO developments. This is not the only UFO image to have recently surfaced. Another as clear as day UAP was photographed in 1990. It depicts a diamond-shaped object hovering in the middle of the sky. It's been named the Calvine photo. With photographs such as these depicting unidentified objects, along with the most recent developments in the matter of UAPs and UFOs, it's only safe to assume that the mystery of these objects and the existence of extraterrestrials is well underway. There are many more documented images that lay in the institutes waiting to be uncovered, and hopefully answer some of the questions that man has long asked. Rodney Alcala appeared on the show called The Dating Game back in the 1970s. An image was released showing the individual seated on the show. Little did anyone know that Rodney Alcala had already begun his homicidal spree. Alcala behaved oddly and in a creepy way during the show, according to some of the others that attended it. Bachelor number 2 was Jed Mills, with Alcala being number 1. Mills explained that Alcala was actually a rather creepy guy, and at one point he approached Mills and told him, "I always get the girl." Alcala had already taken the lives of women, and during this interview, Mills realized that this statement that he made actually meant that he took their lives. Even though he behaved so strangely, Alcala won the show. The Bachelorette, though, never went on a date with him because she found him far too creepy. Alcala would later go on to be convicted of 7 homicides, although it's believed that he actually took the lives of at least 130 people, which is based off of imagery that the authorities uncovered at his property. The incredibly horrific story is now being made into a film, with Guillermo Diaz playing the part of Alcala, with a striking resemblance to the offender. Diaz explained that the man had a dark soul and showed no remorse for what he had done. The film shows how Alcala would lure in his victims as he posed as a photographer. According to detectives, he would then toy with his victims as if the whole ordeal was some sort of game. It was alleged that he'd already served time in prison before he went on to the dating game. Producers of this show had for some reason overlooked his offensive criminal record. At the time, Alcala was 35 years old. He was convicted of 5 homicide cases in Orange County, California, and 2 homicide cases in New York, all of which took place in the 1970s. The victims of these homicides were all female. Investigators also believe that he's connected to other cases in Los Angeles, Seattle, New Hampshire, Arizona, and Marin County, California. In 2016, Alcala was charged by Wyoming prosecutors with taking the life of 28-year-old Christine Ruth Thornton, who had disappeared in 1978. Alcala was deemed too ill to be extradited to Wyoming in order to face this charge. A detective with Sweetwater County Sheriff's Office in Wyoming, Jeff Shaman, had interviewed Alcala while he was working on the cold case of Thornton in 2013. He stated that he was the coldest person he had ever met, and that he generally just gave him the creeps. Shaman explained that during interviews with the authorities, the offender would pretend to be asleep while trying his index finger over the images of the victims. This was said to be done for his own amusement and to irritate the investigators. 6 years after one of his initial offenses, in 1978, Alcala appeared in a brown suit and a butterfly-colored shirt on the dating game as Bachelor Number 1. He was described by the host as a successful photographer and that he can be found skydiving or motorcycling between takes. Alcala would go on to become a camp counselor in New Hampshire. He was then arrested after someone noticed a flyer of him at a post office. The flyer was an indicator that he was wanted by authorities. He was convicted of the initial assault, and after 34 months he was paroled. In 1980, he was sentenced for another serious crime in Orange County, California, but in 1984, the conviction was reversed by the California Supreme Court on the grounds that this case was tainted by evidence of prior crimes that had been placed into his trial, and he was granted a retrial. Again, the sentencing in the new trial was overturned in 2003, and another retrial was granted. Detectives were then able to link DNA with Alcala in 4 more homicides. The victims were Jill Barkham, who was 18, George Wickstead, who was 27, which occurred in 1977, and Charlotte Lamb, who was 32 in 1978. And in 1979, he had taken the life of 21-year-old Jill Paranto. In 2010, authorities then released various images that had been found in a storage locker belonging to Alcala in Seattle. After this, many women had come forward, saying that a photographer by the name of John Berger had photographed them in New York in the 1970s. In 2012, Alcala was then extradited and pleaded guilty to 2 more homicides, and the following year he was sentenced to 25 years to life. At the time that the game show image was taken, no one had known that this man would go on to take the lives of so many individuals, and it certainly came as a shock to the community. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.